Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg.
I'm Joel.
And we are here without Teddy. I'm sorry. He's at a playtime right now. But we are going to talk about our best reads of 2024 so far. Yay!
Yay.
It's exciting.
I have to think I like my list.
Yeah, I like my list too. It's been a good reading year, a bit of a challenging reading year. I had a really hard time getting started because stress. Yeah. It's a thing. But we are going to include one nonfiction book, then we're going to talk about our fiction picks, and then we'll throw in our worst at the end. So these books don't have to have been published in 2024. We just have to have read them in 2024. And we are here doing subtle shout outs for our dogs and drink. I'm wearing a Guinness t-shirt, and we did bring the orange Jameson back. So cocktails with Greg and Joel. Cheers. While we talk about our best reads so far.
Yes.
Slancha.
You can hit pause, go get your own cocktail, and join us.
Yes, if you'd like to join. So what is our nonfiction pick? Because we both selected the same
book.
Nonfiction book. What is it?
Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt.
Yes.
I thought it was a beautiful book. I've known about this book for many years, and we were actually talking about it. My mother read it. And
yeah.
So when we were going to Ireland, we were wanting to do Irish authors, and I thought this would be a perfect one because it's always been on my radar.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I wanted to read before we went, and I started listening to the audio, which is phenomenal.
Really good.
He read it himself a long time ago, and his inflection, the way he tells the story is so great. When there's a song, he sings it.
Yeah.
And it really brings out the sense of humor, because the thing everybody talks about with Angela's Ashes is how sad it is. And it is.
It is. It's a really sad book.
But it has a really great sense of humor. And when you listen to him, it really brings out that sense of humor.
I think it shows even how bad things are, you got to have a sense of humor.
Okay. If you don't laugh, you cry.
Yeah.
That's what they say, at least. Book. So that is, we were talking about whether or not we should include nonfiction. And I think that was really, I don't read a whole lot of nonfiction, so that was really the only one that jumped out for both of us.
I think I had 5 more, and they were just okay. They weren't really worth mentioning.
I had some that, like Radiant by Brad Gooch. I liked it, but it's difficult too because we don't want to spend too much time doing this video. And I don't know how to rank them with fiction, so it just felt easier to focus on the fiction.
So that was probably the best one. It's actually in my top 10, but we are just bringing it as a nonfiction.
Yeah. And separating out from there. So, do you want to go first or second? We both have a top 10.
Yep.
So
I will go first. So we did in my June reads, Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx, and I loved it.
Very good.
We talked about it in the wrap up that I'm like the only person who's never cried through Brokeback Mountain. I actually got a little more sentimental reading the book, but we're going to probably do the movie one night.
Yeah,
too.
we should.
But a great book adapted into a film by Ang Lee, and a short story, little guy.
You could dunk it in your coffee.
Yeah. About 2 cowboys finding love in each other. So.
Yeah. And I will, of course, do a shout out because Brokeback Mountain was originally published and is still published in a short story collection by Annie Proulx called Close Range. Yeah. It's one of my all-time favorite short story collections. So just want to mention that because it's such a good book, all in all. But that is good.
It's written a little different than screenplay, and you just get a little bit more emotional in it, and you kind of know Ennis's thoughts a little bit more too.
Yeah, true. Because he is very blank in the movie.
Yes.
All right, so my number 10 is James by Percival Everett. This is something that I admit I feel like I respect more than I love. Like, it doesn't live in my heart the way some of the other books do, but I really respect everything that Percival Everett did, and for that reason, it makes sense that it kind of just hit into the top 10. If you are unfamiliar, I don't know where you've been because everybody's talking about this book, but this is a sort of reimagining or retelling of Huckleberry Finn. It doesn't really fit either of those classifications, reimagining or retelling, because he spins off in his own direction and tells the story of James, who begins known as Jim. Everybody calls him Jim, and towards the end, he's defines his own identity, hence James, not Jim. And it's something, again, I feel like I respect a lot. I didn't quite like the ending. It felt a little too much like a Quentin Tarantino for me. I think, did you have the same thing? Because you read this.
I wouldn't say Quentin Tarantino because I do not watch his films, so I don't know what that means.
Fair.
But the ending was different.
Yeah. So, but I love so much of what is done and the way it plays around with the notion of like racism and creating your own identity. I feel like the middle of the book was the strongest to me because that's where it really started to take off and have questions of identity and being able to tell your own story. And there's this part where he is forced to perform in blackface because they're trying to keep up the illusion that he's not black. It's so Percival Everett does a lot of really clever things in there. But yeah, so it's number 10 for me. Now let's move to number 9. I will take a sip and you tell us what you have in number 9.
Again, is in my June reads that I read before we went to Ireland. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. And I really love this book. It really, I think being foster parents, and it just brought a lot to me. I just thought it was really beautifully written. Little guy too.
Dunkin' in your coffee.
Yeah, just it was a beautiful book, and so I read the rest of her books, and I liked all of them.
Yeah. She does have 2 other like full story collections. I've only read the small ones, but I love Small Things Like These, and I think it's also a book about being brave and trying to do what's right, and it's about small kindnesses that matter and all things that we tend to love.
Doing the right thing. I mean, that's.
I loved that book. I read it a couple of 2 years ago, 3 years ago. What is time?
Yeah, and I was really shocked by the end, and I knew it was coming, but it was just, I loved who did it. So you got to read it. It's a great book.
It's a very good book. Very, very good book.
Yeah. By the way, James was number 14 for me, so it was up there, but it just didn't make the cut.
Yeah. All right, my number 9 is something I actually just read. It's A Dash of Salt and Pepper by Kosoko Jackson. I had actually picked up a different book and ended up pivoting into Dash of Salt and Pepper because I felt like with the news that's been happening over the last 2 weeks, I needed something a little bit cinnamon bun, something sweet, and it really fit. But it's the kind of romance that I enjoy because it's really about the connection between the 2 protagonists. And they meet. One of them sort of has trust issues. One of them is a little self-absorbed, very sarcastic, and doesn't quite know what he wants to do because he has this big idea for what his life should have been. He was supposed to go into business, and they meet and they form this. I joked to Joel, I feel like books about people coming together and forming healthy, trusting relationships is kind of my kink, I think. I didn't mean to rhyme right there, but I did.
Guy, you.
Yeah. So it really hit that. And we don't need to belabor the point. That's kind of exactly what it did, and I liked it. And hopefully you'll catch up to it sometime soon.
It's coming.
Yeah. So that was exciting for me. That was my number 9. We're going to number 8.
Number 8.
What do you have? 8
Mine
is great.
is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. Very dark book. Very noir. And I really like S.A. Cosby. I started with Razorblade Tears, which you have to read. It's a dark, heavy book, but it's such a good book.
I should just rip the Band-Aid off and do it.
You should.
I really should.
Blacktop Wasteland was next. And then I did All the Sinners Bleed. And it was really good. A very hard subject matter.
Yeah.
But I just like how he writes. And I've watched interviews with him. He's a really nice guy, too.
Really? Yeah. But he writes these dark books.
He writes these horribly dark books.
Yeah, I don't think he's missed for you. I think every single one of his books that you have read, you have liked. Not just liked, you've loved, actually.
I've really enjoyed them.
Yeah. So the trend continues. And when will I finally get around to Razorblade Tears? I don't know. Hopefully this year. I should just do it. Because
maybe in the fall when it's cold and cozier.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Could snuggle on the couch with a blanket and Teddy.
And you hear about
awful things.
Awful things. What do you have?
My number 8 is The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. This is another book that I recently read. I read this in the month of June. And I talked to my Friday reads from that week about how I didn't think I liked it in the beginning. I think I even kept saying to you, I don't know if I like this. Yeah. Because not that it was badly written or anything like that. It just felt kind of familiar in the beginning because you have this woman who's very regimented, lives in a house, and then she sort of gets forced to share her house with her brother's girlfriend. It's set in that post-World War II era in Europe. It's 1961. I just cheated and looked at the back of the book. And once she's forced to share this space with her brother's girlfriend, sparks start to fly. It's not a secret that there's a lesbian attraction. That it's like on the back of the book. But I think what's really interesting and what really started to pay off about this book is that it uses the form of a psychological thriller to explore issues of displacement and complacency and complicity, especially in that time of World War II, and what people did, what people allowed to happen, and the lingering traumas of everything that happened during the war. And it's also a little bit about living in a time when homosexuality was not allowed or was criminalized and hidden away. So it does a lot of really... Is that funny?
No, I was going to say, is this futuristic?
Oh, God, yeah, no,
Sorry.
that's bleak. That is, but accurate. Yeah. So anyway, I ended up really liking what this book did. And I've actually heard from a bunch of people who left comments and said that they have also read this and they also really liked it. And actually, we were just in Montana Book Company yesterday and I was telling Chelsea about it and she seemed really interested. I hope she reads it. I think she would like it. So, The Safekeep.
I may do it too, because when we were talking to her about it, it seemed really interesting.
Yeah, so The Safekeep, Yale van der Wouden. I really ended up enjoying it. We are moving to number 7.
Number 7.
Seven Heaven.
I typically do not throw romance novels into my best books.
Like,
I keep them down.
Genre romance?
Genre romance. I keep them down at the 30s. But this one hit me really hard, and I loved it. It was called The Lights on Knockbridge Lane by Roan Parrish.
You just read that.
Just read it. The reason it really kind of hit me, you find out early in the book, so it's not a spoiler, a man who, his daughter is actually his niece, but he adopts. All she wants for Christmas is to have the most lights on the house for Christmas. And of course, it's a Christmas book and it's a romance. But the little girl is very intrigued by the guy across the street who's the Boo Radley from To Kill a Mockingbird.
There's a Boo Radley type character?
Yeah.
My interest just soared.
He's a vampire, he's a witch, he's a demon, he eats rats and children.
But not literally. That's just what the kids say?
No,
Okay,
that's what the adults say.
Oh, the adults. Wow.
And he lives across the street. But when you find out more about him, you understand him more. But he has social anxiety and anxiety with people. And I really like books that will bring some mental health issues to the surface to kind of show that, I mean, this is real. And so the little girl befriends him. There's attraction between him and the dad. And it really comes together. But it's a hard road for him to get there with his anxiety. Also, the dad has some anxiety too. So it's hard for them to really pull it all together and become one. And it's just a beautiful book. There's also about people helping other people and caring.
I love
and a community that they built among them. So
yeah. So I think I need to read there are 2 books that you read recently that I need to catch up to in the month of July. That's one of them. I'm going to do a little Christmas in July and get to The Lights on Knockbridge Lane because it sounds like something I would really like as well.
And that is a suggestion by Danny, the Bookish Bear. And thank you.
Yeah.
What's your number 7?
My number 7 is Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. If you follow along, you know I love Night of the Living Rez, which was a linked story collection. This is his first novel. And it's really interesting, does a lot of really fascinating things. It's about a complicated family at the center, kind of. It's mostly follows Charles Lamisway, but he has a lot of family stuff going on. So I love anything to do with family stuff. Basically, it also really deals with the concept of blood quantum because Charles Lamisway is white, but spent a lot of his childhood on a reservation, the Penobscot Reservation in Maine, because his stepfather was part of the tribe. After his stepfather dies, his mother is allowed to stay, but at 18 he has to move off because he isn't part of the tribe. And he has a daughter who does not know that she's his daughter, and she, at least in part, does not know that she's his daughter because of this issue of blood quantum. Her mother wants her to be part of the tribe, and if people know that she has a white father, she won't have the percentage required to be part of the tribe. So it also deals a lot with like family history and issues of belonging and what kind of makes you part of a community. Does it have to do with blood, or does it have to do with, a sense of belonging because he feels like he's part of this culture because he grew up with them. And it kind of spins out. It also deals with mental health in some ways. Really interesting book, and I would recommend it. Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. So that was my number 7. Yeah.
My number 6 was Fire Exit by Morgan Talty.
You're kidding.
I did read Night of the Living Rez, which I really enjoyed as well. And then when Greg read this, He really enjoyed it, and it's like I knew I had to read it next. So.
Yeah. That was your exception to Pride Month because...
It was my one exception.
Yeah.
Because he had just read it, and I wanted to read it. So
Yeah, before too much time passed.
Yeah, so we could talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look what happened.
We're talking
7
about
and
it.
6.
Yeah.
So my number 6 is lurking down here, and this was hard. I kept right up until like 5 minutes or 2 minutes before we started filming. I was like stressing about the order, and part of that is because I really like all of the books that are in my top 6. So number 6 is Small Joys by Elvin James Mensa, and I really like this book. So it feels hard putting it a little this kind of low. So I had wanted to read this book for a long time, but my library never got a copy. I recommended that they purchase it, and they didn't. And I never saw it in any bookstores, and it never showed up on any of my subscription apps for the audio. So we went to Ireland and Scotland. Did you know we went to Ireland and Scotland? I might have gotten this t-shirt over there. But anyway.
My shirt said, "I'm another shirt in the closet. Wear me." So.
We walked into the Golden Hair bookstore,
Great bookstore
in Edinburgh. That was our favorite bookstore in Edinburgh. And this was out on the table. I think it had recently come out in paperback over there. And I actually like the cover from the UK better. But anyway, I immediately picked it up and read the back of the book to you, and you get emotional. So had to happen, and brought it home. I think I started reading it on the plane on the way home and loved it. So you have Harley, who is the protagonist of the book. He has suicidal ideation, so trigger warning for that for like a big chunk of the book. He is actually contemplating self-harm at the beginning of the book when he runs into this guy named Muddy, who is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And it turns out Muddy is his new roommate because he has Harley has just dropped out of college and is moving back in with his friend. And Muddy had sort of moved in the meantime when he went to college. And they formed this really great friendship. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about people forming friendships and helping each other in issues of mental health. It's really about Harley finding belonging and accepting that he is a person who is allowed to be loved and has not actually done bad things to make people hate him. He has been rejected by his father, blames himself for his mother died during childbirth, and his father blames him for that. And then he blames himself for that. So he's sort of overcoming all of those issues, and then these friends form this really sweet, supportive friend group, and I loved it. I just thought it was absolutely great. I'm willing to bet we're going to end up talking more about this at some point, so I'm going to stop there, and we'll probably continue the conversation later. What do you have? What number are we on? So we're moving into number 5.
Yeah. My next one was Tin Man. I thought it was a beautiful book.
And it is literally a beautiful book as well.
It literally is. It has a great cover.
Yeah.
Again, it's another story of friendship, taking care of each other. And Greg sold me on it.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely love the book.
Yeah. It's a very good book. Yeah. We're going to talk about it again. So, number 5 for me is Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. This is actually, you know what, Danny, that Bookish Bear is going to factor in a lot because he recommended that one to you. He recommended this to me. I'd heard good things about it, but he read this last year and loved it. And somewhere along the way, he told me, it's like, no, you need to read this. So I found the audio in January, right about the time I had gotten this at my local used bookstore at some point last year, but I decided to do the audio in January, which is read by Maura Tierney.
I love her.
She does such a good job. Her voice for this story is so perfect. Like, she should read every audiobook almost. Meryl Streep did a great job with Tom Lake, and like Sissy Spacek did great To Kill a Mockingbird. But like the 3 of them should be the only people doing audiobooks because it's so good. And this is another complicated family book. It's very sad. The one thing I will say, I have noticed some of the other books in my top 6 have stood out in my memory a little more. Like, I don't remember all of the things, but that's also because this is the one that I read the longest ago. I read this one in January, and I read some of the others in the top 6 much more recently. But I really loved it. I thought it was beautiful. And right on the heels of reading Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, this was like another home run. And I think all of the people who were so excited when I read Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant should probably read Hello Beautiful, because it has very similar vibes. And it's about a sibling story. It is... Little Women is mentioned on the book itself. And I think if you go in expecting like a modern version of Little Women, you're going to be disappointed because it's not that. It kind of takes sort of thematic concepts from Little Women and pulls them into this in telling a story of sisters growing up together and having a shared history. And it's really beautiful.
I'll do it.
Book. Yeah. So that is Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano, and that was number 5. We're moving into number 4.
Number 4.
What do you have? I love it.
I know, Tom Lake by Ann Patchett.
I have tried so hard not to see what's... I kind of know what's on your list, but I don't know the order.
Yeah.
So I've been really excited to see where this would fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this book. The thing is, Meryl Streep read the audio, and I could honestly see Meryl Streep sitting at the table with her girls, telling about her time growing up.
Yeah, like they
not
need to make a
necessarily
movie.
in the story, but just how she got started and the horrible things that happened to her before she made it big. This was such a beautiful book.
It is.
Really well written. The characters are great.
Yeah.
And just had so much fun reading this. This is one you turned me on to.
Yeah, I read it almost a year ago at this point. What is time? And the more time has passed, the more this book has grown in my estimation, because I think it does a lot of really smart, subtle things in telling stories about life and mother-daughter relationships, husband-wife relationships, and how your life unfolds and the passage of time. It's a really beautiful book. Like, if you're a fan of Ann Tyler or Elizabeth Strout, Ann Patchett is like right in that wheelhouse. And Marilyn Robinson, people who do really subtle but sharp observations about, quiet life and things like that. This is perfectly in that wheelhouse.
You've got me watching Ann Patchett's Parnassus books on Instagram, and she is really good. She actually throws a lot of things out there. But the more I've gotten to know Ann Patchett through video, I can see her writing this book.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's
for
totally her.
It's so
vibe.
good. And it has our Lord and Savior Meryl Streep involved. So that was number 4?
That's number 4.
All right, my number 4 is another one. It really hurts me that it's not at number 1. It's Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame by Olivia Ford, which is the sweetest, cutest,
It is.
wonderful little book. I love it, and I think you love it. So I won't say too much about it, except that it's about a woman named Mrs. Quinn. She's 74, and she hasn't really done anything for herself in her life. She's married. They didn't have kids, but she's sort of thrown herself into taking care of her husband, taking care of their family, and things like that. So now she's 74, and she feels like she hasn't done anything for herself. She applies for a show that is clearly a stand-in for the Great British Bake Off, and she gets on the show. And it's about her competing, and I think you said something really interesting, which is that there's almost a Slumdog Millionaire aspect to it, but only in the sense that there are flashback portions and the recipes that she has to make, because every chapter is titled a recipe, and it ties back to something in her past, and it unfolds in a really beautiful and sweet way. I love the relationship between her and her husband and her family and the other competitor whose name I always forget, but it's just really, they have such a great dynamic. And I love the book, and I kind of want a sequel where she competes on an all-star season and just goes back into it's a barn because it can't be a tent.
Yeah.
And goes back and competes with the same competitor, just because I want them all to come back and more. I need more.
I mean, of course, you have the villain contestant that you don't like.
Yeah.
You have another contestant that you are rooting for both of them, but only one can win.
Yeah, it's such a good book, and I would absolutely recommend it to you. So that was my number 4.
Yay. All right, my number 4 is Here We Go Again by Alison Cochran.
Yeah.
Before we jump into this, I messed up. Fire Exit is not in my top 10. It was like 11. And I got excited because I love the book. He loved the book. And he had it right there. It's like, oh, I read it too. So I messed up. Fire Exit is really good, but it was not in my top 10. So my number 4 was Here We Go Again by Alison Cochran.
We're very excitable people.
We are.
And I love this book. So go ahead.
Alison Cochran has done a lot of books that we've liked. And
All hits, yeah.
they're romance,
But they're great.
yeah.
Charm Offensive was the first, and I did not think I was going to like that one because it's set in the world of like a Bachelor type TV show.
Me too.
And yet it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It's like two people who meet and immediately help each other through things. It deals with mental health, and they have this really great relationship. And then Kiss Her Once for Me is the second one, which is a queer holiday romance. I mean, could there be a more us thing? And it's just, that one I'd say is a little bit more of like a pure romance. It's wonderful. And then this is the
Here
third.
we go again is two high school friends that kind of lost touch, but both female. But their professor is dying and wants to go back to his family cabin to die. So he recruits these two to take him back. Well, he has ulterior motives, trying to get them to be friends again.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful story of, again, a common theme here. Friendship, chosen family, taking care of each other, supporting each other.
And mental health.
There is some mental health parts in there. And it was a sad book, too.
Yeah.
Because you know he's going to die, but his final trip in his life, a lot of love comes out of it too.
Yeah, like it is sad because you know that is how the book is going to end, but it's also very sweet and it's also very positive and upbeat because it's about life and the meaning that you give to it, and it ends up being really beautiful. So I'm gonna out my number three because it's Here We Go Again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I also liked it is because he's choosing how to end his life.
Yes, and he wants it on his terms.
Yeah, which I find to be very important.
Yeah, for sure. It's just it's my number 3 of the year. And I think it is probably the book I've had the biggest emotional response to. When I finished this book, thank goodness you were home.
Yes.
Because I finished it and had to go find you in the house, like doing the ugly cry with the quivering lip. So you knew I had finished the book, and I had to get a hug. Like, that's how much I loved this book, and that's how much we love you.
Really good.
So it's a good book. It's a really good book. All the feels, all the feels. And it's again, it feels like it would be easy to just call it like a romance book and make it seem like a throwaway, but there's a lot that goes on in that book.
You know, there's a lot to be said about, so-called romance books. I think my male-on-male romance are cute stories. They're not like almost a full novel of something real happening. And I shouldn't discount them at all. But I think Alison Cochrane, there is the romance behind, but the story is up front.
Yes. And it's more about the people than about anything else.
To be honest, Here We Go Again really only has one sex scene.
Yes.
But I found it to be, this is going to sound weird, you got to read the book. It was more artistic. I thought it was beautifully written, beautifully done. I don't know.
I get it. It's not about the sex. It's not about trying to be spicy or erotic. It is ultimately an expression of the connection that these two women have. Yeah. So I get that.
Okay.
I get that. Yeah. So now we've also covered my number 3. What is your number 3?
My number 3 is, I just finished this. Thank you again to Danny, that bookish bear.
He's everywhere.
I know. Abby Jimenez is Just for the Summer.
Yeah. So this is actually going to be my next book. I just downloaded the audio yesterday, but I haven't started it. So go.
Let's read it. This book hit me in so many ways. I thought it was funly written, I guess I should say, is kind of how it goes. When you read it, you'll understand.
Okay.
But it's just getting to know the connection of these two people coming together. They each have to struggle through a big thing in their life to get to this point.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's just like they don't just fall together. They actually make it work.
Which was interesting because I think this is the book that's about the two people who, when they date someone and then they break up, the person they broke up with finds their true love like immediately. So both people have had that reputation, and so they decide they're going to date each other for the summer. And then when they break up, at least one of them will find their true love. Well, so that's the gimmick, right?
They both have this reputation. When they break up with somebody, the next person they date the person they break up with, the next person they date, they get married to, or serious relationships. So they both have had this issue. So they think if they date for the summer and break up, they will both go off and meet their true love.
But then stuff starts getting real. Let me listen to me making it sound like the real world. Never mind.
No, it actually takes time to learn about each other and not sexually. It's just like, I mean, they're in this just for the let's break the spell, but they learn about each other, and it's not like they're dating, but they learn a lot. It's like they want to go on 4 dates, 1 kiss, before they really figure out what's happening, and then they break up. But those 4 dates, they learn so much about each other, and you're gonna love the male in this. Yeah,
really.
He's just this awesome guy.
I did. So we were at Montana Book Company yesterday, and spoiler for my July book haul, we didn't realize this was in paperback, so we grabbed a copy because you wanted to have one in the library anyway. But then when I was looking at the cover, I did have to ask you, like, so nothing happens to the dog, right? Apparently it's fine. So
the dog is the dog's totally fine. He has a big plot point, which is, it's a little plot point, but it is so funny how the dog factors in.
Really? Well, I like that even more now, so I'm excited to start.
Really fun book. Thank you, Danny. This just really tugged at me.
Yeah, I'm excited to read it.
This book has a lot of triggers. Go to Storygraph and look and see what some of the triggers are. This has some really heavy stuff in it, too. And so if you do have certain things that really trigger you, make sure you look them up. But I was in the middle of Costco, shopping around, looking around. I'm bawling.
Oh, no.
Because of one of the scenes in here.
Oh, no. All right. We're going into the top 2.
Top 2.
So my second place finish was Amongst Women by John McGahern. So you will notice in the description box down below, there are links to every one of these books on bookshop.org. If we make you interested in them, you can use those links and it'll give us a bit of a kickback, or you can use your independent bookstore. This is the only one that does not have an affiliate link because it's not available on bookshop.org. You can kind of track down a copy of this in the United States. It's not going to be easy because it's not readily available. And the reason I say that is just to preface that I wanted to read this last fall because I read Nuala O'Foylin's Are You Somebody, which is a memoir. She mentions John McGahern in it, and I think she even specifically mentions this book in it. And then I couldn't find it anywhere in the United States. You can order it online. Somebody recently commented, it's like, oh, well, Small Jizz, was that not available on ebook? I don't read ebooks, so I need to track down either the print book or the audio. So while we were in Ireland and Scotland, did you know we went to Ireland and Scotland? I made sure I got a copy of this because his books are all widely available over there. And I started reading this as we were traveling around Ireland and Scotland, and I loved it. I almost didn't pay attention looking out the window when we were on a train from Inverness to Edinburgh because I was loving this book that much. So you have a man named Moran who had fought in the War for Independence. Sorry, I was cheating and looking at the back of the book. And now he is living on a farm with his wife is gone and he has daughters, but he does kind of quickly remarry in the book. And he has 2 sons, and he is sort of dissatisfied with the way things have turned out after the war. And he at first refuses to take a pension and makes things a little more difficult for himself. Making things difficult for himself is kind of a trend in his life. And it's ultimately, I think, more about the women because the daughters and the wife are really the ones who are keeping this train on the tracks. They are the ones who are tying the family together, where the men are just kind of acting a bit boorish and blowing things up and fighting. And I thought that was really smart and interesting. It's also really beautifully written. And I got so much out of reading this book. And I really want to read more John McGahern books. I have 2 more on the shelf that I've tracked down, and I'm really looking forward to it. Amongst Women was a beautiful book. So that is my number 2. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is another one where we just shared.
Yes.
It's Small Joys that we got over in Ireland.
Yeah.
I think I liked it a lot. I'm not saying I liked it more than you, but I liked it a lot more on my list because Muddy is really wanting to help this guy. He knows this guy is probably a little suicidal, a little depressed, struggling through a lot of things.
Doesn't see joy in life.
Doesn't have any joy in his life, and joy literally follows Muddy around.
Yeah, he just like a
Ray
bolt
of
of
sunshine.
sunbeam. Yeah.
So Muddy becomes his person and really helps him see the joys in his life.
Yeah.
And I think that's what got me the most.
Yeah.
Is you're dealing with mental health. Muddy has his issues too.
Yeah.
But you kind of put some things aside to help other people. And that's why this book hit me so much. So
Yeah. It is really beautiful.
Strongly recommend this book.
And I do think the book is also smart enough to sort of recognize that Muddy is the type of person to take care of everyone around him and not take very good care of himself. So it's I know.
That?
Who does that remind me of? So it's also about caring for the people who care for you in the end. And it is a really, like I said, every book in my top 6 is a smash hit. That's why this has been such a good reading year.
I say they're really hard to rate. I say my top 10 are just my top 10.
Yeah, you could easily mash, especially my top 6, just together and not rank them at all. And I would actually kind of be fine with that.
Yeah. I don't give books a 4.5 rating, but my top 6 are 4.5 rating.
Yeah.
Because they're not a 5, they're not a classic, and they're not a 4 because they're too good. So they're 4.5. So
yeah. Oh, no, I get it. All right. So my number 1 is something you've already talked about, Tin Man by Sarah Winman, which I had been so nervous to read for such a long time because it feels like every time I would even mention this book, I would get a bunch of comments who would say, you are going to love that book. That is such a Greg book. And it started to feel like pressure. Like, well, what if I read it? And ultimately that's kind of silly because it doesn't really matter if I read it and don't like it. But it did. Like, these are the games your head plays with you. I was kind of like, well, what happens if I read it and I don't like it? And then eventually you start to realize, who cares? So I read it and I loved it. So you have 3 people, Ellis, Michael, and Annie. And I don't quite agree with the description of the book on the back. It makes it seem like there's a bit of a mystery because Ellis and Michael were friends when they were 12 years old. And then when you jump into the future, Ellis is married to Annie and Michael hasn't gone anywhere. Well, it's not actually much of a mystery. They know where Michael is.
Yeah.
So they're just not really in contact. So that part I think doesn't quite describe it. But the part that I think fits is that where it talks about, it's about love in all of its forms and all the little moments and small kindnesses that make up a life. And I love that. And I think it does such a beautiful job dealing with all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got these at the same time, read them at the same time.
Yeah.
And I thought they really were good books to read together.
Yes.
I mean, you have a lot of goodness and stuff, but you have the conflicts among the people. But I think they're just really great complementary books.
They are, because again, this one is, you could kind of call it Small Joys and it would actually fit in a way. You couldn't call that one Tin Man, but still, like, there are actually surprising corollaries. I wouldn't have thought of that, but you're right.
Yeah, I thought they're very complementary.
I don't want to give a lot away, but so Michael and Ellis meet when they're 12 because Michael goes to live with his grandmother. And in the last the last 50 pages of this book, just like stabbed me in the heart in a beautiful way. Is that possible? I don't know. But it tells the story of how he moved in with his grandmother, and the levels of kindness in that, just I love this book.
Yeah,
I really do.
Good.
So
I will say, do not do the audio. There are page breaks, and these page breaks are time shifts, and the audio doesn't do a time shift or a page break. It just keeps going. And I'm asking Greg, how did this work? He was here, but he had this, and it shouldn't be here, but he was. So we looked at the book, and there's a page break.
Yeah. So it makes sense.
All the difference in the world.
Like, obviously, in the book, there's like a visual cue, but the book moves that's the other thing, that this description on the back makes it seem like you're existing in 2 different time periods. Ellis and Michael when they're 10, and then this time period where Ellis and Annie are married. No, the book moves fluidly back and forth and forward in time throughout. So, yeah.
It doesn't really make any, at one point it's past, one point it's present.
Yeah.
And it just goes back and forth, back and forth. And the audio does not tell you that.
Although Sarah Winman does read the audio and it sounds beautiful.
She's beautifully read.
Yeah, so I started it on audio, but I was loving the language of the book so much that I wanted to spend time with the language. So I pivoted to the book. So I'm actually glad that I read it in print first, but I actually might go back and listen to the audio at some point.
I may actually read the book.
Look at that. We're going to cross over and do the opposite. So that's my number one read of 2024 so far. Honestly, I have a very hard time imagining that anything is going to push anything, at least in my top 6, out by the end of the year. But we shall see. Maybe there are more Tin Mans lurking around. So, drum roll. Can I guess your top one? I'm trying to think.
You already know my top one.
Well, wait, because we don't have any more books out here. Oh! Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame?
Very good.
Okay. Because we don't have a copy of it.
I looked to see if they still had a copy of it. I sold it last time.
He did. He sold Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame.
Why this book really hits me so high to get it on my list is this woman wanted to leave something behind. And one thing Greg didn't say in his blurb on it is you go back in time and you learn a lot about Mrs. Quinn.
Yeah.
Before she was Mrs. Quinn, you kind of learn a lot of her struggles and her insecurities and why she wanted to go on to Brit and Bake and win is she lost a lot in her past and she wanted to have something to show. Yeah. And Brit and Bake is that something for her to show.
Yeah.
I would have totally rewritten the ending a little bit.
See, I actually kind of like the ending. I do understand how you would change it.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to talk about, not to just...
Yeah, it's really hard to talk about.
So after we talk about our worst book, do you want to do a spoiler discussion?
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
We can try that. But, so go ahead. Change the ending.
So I really loved the book and who she was. And it's actually fun because I really enjoyed the recipes too.
Yeah.
Her big bake and kind of her signature bake was a Black Forest Gâteau, which somebody got for his birthday.
Yeah.
He may put a picture of that in here.
I will definitely put a picture of that in here because it came out beautifully. So our tradition, we should explain, is when someone in the family has a birthday, they pick a cake and Joel will make it for them. So I'm trying to think of ones in the past. One year I decided I just wanted something that we could have for breakfast. So you made me a lemon blueberry coffee cake.
Yeah. Our foster son wanted an opera cake, and I'd never made one. It's a very elaborate cake.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt bad because I was like, wow, you just picked the hardest cake for me to make.
Which would be an innocuous joke to anyone. Except your foster son, who is really insecure. So, like, the next year he chose the easiest cake.
The easiest cake possible.
Yeah.
Last year, Greg has never had a red velvet cake. So Greg makes my birthday cake.
Well, I had not had a red velvet cake. I've liked red velvet. I have a whole thing about red velvet cake. I think it was overdone for a long time. But you always told me you have a great red velvet cake recipe. So for his birthday, I made him a cake. You pick something and I make it. And it doesn't come out as pretty, but it's made with love.
We will do a spoiler at the very end. Greg will bookmark it. Yeah. You'll put a big splash page.
We'll end the end the video for anybody who doesn't want the Mrs. Quinn spoiler, and then we'll dive into that. Yeah. So but let's start with our worst books.
Worst books.
So I think it's not going to surprise anyone. My worst book of 2024 so far is Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips. I didn't even bother picking it up. We don't need to go into it. I link my Pulitzer Prize video where.
Down below. And you can go on that journey if you would like. What's your worst so far? I had several, but the one I was kind of disappointed and didn't really like was The Royal Wolf Murders by Keith McCaffrey. He has a huge series.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be kind of fun, but it wasn't. So.
And unfortunately, because they're very popular books in Montana. He's a Montana author.
In Montana,
yeah. So
there's like 8 of them in Book Exchange.
Yeah. Very popular.
Yeah.
So.
But everything else kind of made it really good down there, and I liked. But that was the only one that I finished, but I wasn't happy about it.
Yeah. That
I
makes
wanted to
sense.
know how it ended.
Yeah. And there you have it.
And also Fellow Travelers. That was another one.
Oh, yeah, you weren't very
that should
thrilled
have
with
been
that.
on the book.
Yeah.
It was just not what I wanted. It's a good book, well written. It's just not what I thought it was going to be, and not what I wanted.
Another hot take. Actually, I don't think that's a hot take necessarily. But anyway. So there you have it. Our best books of 2024 so far, and 3 worsts, 2 for you, 1 for me. And we'll be back with a lot more. If you want to stay for the spoiler discussion, you can, but otherwise, happy reading. And hopefully by now, if you wanted to drop off, you have dropped off. So, what is it about the ending of Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame? Spoiler. Yes. We should explain a little bit about the plot first, actually. So the flashbacks have to do with her as 18. Is she 18?
Yeah, she's young.
She's very young.
18, just out of
18, 20, somewhere thereabouts. She gets pregnant, and because she's not married, her father sends her to a convent. It has feelings of like Magdalene Laundry type things. So she gives birth, and the baby is taken from her, and then she goes back. And she's devastated that the baby was taken from her, and she ends up meeting her husband, and her life kind of goes from there. So they were never able to have kids, but she actually does have a son somewhere out in the world.
She didn't want to have kids.
Right, yes.
And he probably would have been, he's so sweet. He would have been a beautiful father.
Yeah.
But she just couldn't have kids because her heart couldn't take it, because she knows her baby boy is out there somewhere.
Yeah. So that's the flashbacks in Mrs. Quinn. That's the secret that she had. If you read the blurb of the book, it talks about a secret she hasn't told her husband. That's the secret.
And her husband finds out, and he doesn't quite get it, but he loves her, and they figure it all out. Well, after she wins, when she
doesn't win.
No.
Since we're doing spoilers, right?
Right.
The other guy wins.
The other guy wins. But being that she didn't win, all her recipes go flashback to what she made. She has this book that she cooks all of her stuff out of. Well, that book was left with the baby.
Yeah.
So somewhere this baby boy has this cookbook or this recipe book with everything she's made on the Great British or the Bake Off. I wanted the boy to watch and kind of really cheer for this woman, but then slowly realize it's wait, I have a cookbook with all these recipes in it. What in the book, what she does, she puts an ad out there trying to find this baby, and somebody sees the ad.
Well, she, in that way of older people, she doesn't realize that Facebook is not anonymous. Yeah. So she posts looking for her son and doesn't realize that people who are watching the show will know that she posted it. So it becomes this big news story that she's looking for her lost son.
And it comes out to her husband and conflict. But I wanted it to be more natural. I wanted this man to watch her on TV. It's like some of the, even when we watched Bake Off with Nancy, it's like, God, I love Nancy. She's so sweet. Yeah. But what if Nancy was making all these recipes that I have this book with all these recipes in it. This is weird. Yeah. And I wanted him to find her naturally. He does find her at a book signing.
Book signing. Shows up and
at a book signing. And he just hands her the book and says, "Will you sign this?" And she kind of looks up. I wanted...
So he wanted the recipe book to be the thing, and the fact that he would know a lot of the recipes that she was making on the show to be the thing, which would make sense. Yeah. And the plot kind of forces there to be a more obvious way to get them together. I didn't have a problem with it, but I do see. And the recipe book was right there to be the thing. Right. And it's not unbelievable that someone wouldn't realize that Facebook is anonymous, but it does feel a little bit forced. Yeah. So
I think it could have been done really well for her to go on a book tour or cookbook tour and do all these things. And this person say, these books are in there, and go find her naturally. And then once the son does come and say, will you sign this and everything, it doesn't really get into it. They cuts forward. Yeah. She and her husband are going up to the house to meet him. Yeah. And you don't see that relationship. I kind of wanted... I wanted my 1 year later with a little relationship.
She loves a 1 year later.
I wanted a 1 year later where she actually has a relationship with her son and her grandkids, teaching her grandkids how to cook. Yeah. That's how I learned how to cook. And that's kind of what
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen in the book.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the way it ended. It does, but it is a bit of a pet peeve when a book does that thing where there will be a revelation and then the chapter ends and you don't get the end of that conversation. So, I mean, that's a little annoying, but I thought it was sweet that we got to go with her to meet her son's family for the first time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's my spoiler. That's how
Well, now the hard thing is, how are people going to comment? And I didn't think about that. So I guess if you want to leave a comment about that, maybe write like spoiler warning.
Space.
Yeah. So people will not read the spoiler if they don't want to.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with the way it ended, but I do think your way would have made a little more, less like...
My way would have been better.
Less pratfalling in the plot would have been necessary.
My way would have been better.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. As long as we agree on that.
We agree. But I didn't have a problem with it as it was. But clearly you didn't have a problem either since it was your favorite of the year.
I love the book.
Yeah.
But I would love a sequel.
I would love a sequel. The sequel would be amazing. So
awesome.
And there you have it.
Yeah.
Those are our best books of 2024 so far.
The worst books so far.
Worst books, the best nonfiction, and a spoiler. This video has everything. This video has everything. Given how good the reading has been in the first half of 2024, I'm really looking forward to what we have coming up. And I got to catch up to 2 of the books that were in your top 10.
You do.
So it's exciting. Stay tuned for all of that. And as always, we really appreciate your time. We will be back. Until next time, happy reading.
And happy baking.
Happy baking.